Mike. That was great. Thank you. As I was listening to you and Dr. Canton talk, I found myself thinking, what has been taking... There's a lot of promise in all of this, and it's tempting to... What I was trying to get at is, why is it happening now? What got in the way of it happening 5 years ago, for example?
I think the barriers are really around, one, awareness, two, the software being there. So this standard was commercially available in January of '04. Software tools have generally a 2 or 3 year development cycle. And so as the software now is online, this is just out of the box stuff. Many software tools you use today, this is an embedded feature. So now that you have no cost of adoption there, it's really cost of awareness and the opportunity to leverage it in your process designs.
The other thing that I was thinking about as you guys were talking was, how do you get people to share data and information? One of the things you discover when you work in a corporation, whether or not it's small or large, is that regardless of technology, people like to hoard information, and they consider information to be the coin of the realm, and they don't like to share it, regardless of whether or not they have the capacity to. Is that going to change?
I think people like to be recognized. So the sharing thing is part of being recognized. And if you look on the internet, the blogs are positive proof that people like to collaborate. The social networking is really part of the entire internet fabric. What we're talking about is bringing that into the enterprise and bringing it to the market. An example I'll give you is this iMetrics tool and the Zimba tool. These tools enable the sharing of intellectual property just like an MP3 file on an iPod or a Napster. So think about the modeling principles that are in your Excel worksheet if you could trade those just like MP3 files.
If I were Amazon.com and I had all this consumer data about consumer preferences data, would I be happy to share this information, or would I want to try to keep it more closely held?
I think this does not mandate full transparency. In most companies, including Amazon, management has just as much problem getting their hands on the data as anybody else. So you could leverage this inside of an enterprise to make the internal data more transparent and reuseful to the internal management team. Then they can make their own assessments on what they want to share with their investors. Jim, you're exactly right. And what I didn't talk about the Bank of Spain is the chairman of the Bank of Spain is the chairman of the European Union Committee of Executive Banking Supervisors. So not only did he drive it in Spain, he actually drove it through the entire European Union in terms of how the European Union adopts Basel II, which is the international banking transparency risk management model. So exactly the case, but you can't hide, and you shouldn't be hiding in that environment. And, for companies, though, my point would be, it's not their money. So it's not up to Amazon as to what they're going to disclose because it's not their money, it's their investors' money. And the sooner we figure that out, I think the better off we'll all be.
Are there any other questions from the audience? I know that there's some secret accounting buffs among you.
Well, I got a question. Does anybody here like to get on a scale in the bathroom and have somebody standing there watching them? Does anybody like that? No, none of us like that. But that's what Jim just talked about. Do you want transparency? Heck no. Do you want the ability to measure your own performance in a more efficient way and kind of know how you're doing? Absolutely. So, I don't like getting on that scale, but I do it because I know it's going to help me feel better and live longer, right? This is that same kind of model. So you don't have to go out in the front yard and scream what your weight is, but you still want the ability to measure your performance and do so efficiently.
Yeah, and in a world where I think increasingly, we're going to be challenged with not just transparency, but shareholders driving more competitive? You know, why aren't more shareholders saying, hey, XBRL, we want them embracing XBRL because it'll give us the transparency we need to be able to know what our investments look like. I mean, you can imagine, you know, like major investors, particularly institutional investors, are going to want to drive XBRL adoption, particularly for those portfolio companies, as opposed to, you know, the hedge funds are kind of the antithesis of that. You know, the more complexity and invisibility, the more you can operate, and maybe it's questionable about what you're doing and what you're not doing. This is part of, that's why I said earlier, this XBRL is part of this wave of transparency that might challenge how people monetize assets in a fundamentally new way. And, you know, it's a little like telling the emperor he's got no clothes. I think it's very bold. I think it's bold stuff.
I think the discussion here is really around the capital markets. The same exact supply chain processes exist in the enterprise. So if you forget about the external reporting for a minute, most companies have the same exact problems in their own business processes. So forget about what you tell the market. Let's try and pull the cost out of your enterprise processes right now. So, you know, all the spreadsheets you have, all the manual controls you have, the manual processes, those are the things that you can start to chip away at right now. And, you know, that's happening right now as we speak anyway.
In the companies that you guys work with, have the changes that have the increase in transparency that these tools have created changed the way they structure their managements, changed the way they communicate among each other, made their organizations flatter, and so forth? Are there any examples of that yet?
I wouldn't say holistically, but I would give you a couple of examples. Large bank, one of their business segments, the CFO, he had 35 analysts sitting out there in his bullpen area doing monthly analysis on spreadsheets, 35, and they were doing the same analysis every month. And so he said, hey, look, forget about external reporting. That's my problem. Go fix that problem. So we took these same principles, applied it to the 35 analysts. For 2 people were out there for 2 months. So not a big number. And at the end of the 2 months, instead of 35 analysts, there were 5 analysts. And the 5 analysts were doing more work than the 35. So did the organization get flatter? Yeah. Did it get more efficient? Yes. Lower costs? Yes. Did they do it across the entire organization? Don't know, because what happened was the 30 analysts that got freed up actually went to other business segments to teach them what we taught them.